You know, in cybersecurity, getting hacked is rarely a single event. The initial breach, that's often just the first step. Today, we're diving into what happens next, how attackers climb the ladder of access once they're already inside the walls.
Think about this for a second. It's a pretty chilling scenario, right? You're logged in with your regular, everyday user account. But at the same time, somewhere in the shadows of your network, an intruder who snuck in with those same limited permissions is quietly working their way up to becoming a full-blown administrator. They're grabbing the keys to the entire kingdom. So how on earth do they pull that off?
All right, let's dive into our first section, the climb to control. At its heart, privilege escalation is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the whole process an attacker uses to go from a nobody, a low-level user, to someone with serious power. You can almost think of it like a character leveling up in a video game, except, it's a hacker inside your network. So why is this such a big deal? Well, here's the scary part. As an attacker's privilege level goes up, all those security controls you rely on, they just start to disappear. Your digital fences, your locked doors, they're all built for certain types of users. Once someone becomes an admin, they're not just past the fence, they're in the security office itself. Now, escalation isn't always about climbing straight up. There's what we call vertical escalation. That's the classic move, going from a regular user to an admin. But there's also horizontal escalation, and that can be just as bad. That's when an attacker, instead of moving up, moves sideways to take over another account at the same level, maybe because that user has access to a different set of juicy files or systems. So what's the end game for them? What are they really after? Well, it usually boils down to these three things. First, persistence. They want to be able to stay in your system for the long haul, totally undetected. Then, control, so they can change things and manipulate the environment. And finally, the crown jewel, data access. Let's be honest, that's what almost every major breach is really all about.
Okay, that brings us to Section 2, opening the locked doors.
This list might look a little long, but these are the everyday, common weak spots that attackers are constantly hunting for. We're not always talking about some sophisticated zero-day exploit you see in the movies. A lot of the time, it's really simple oversights that leave the door wide open. Let's just zoom in on that first one, misconfigurations. A really small mistake, like a permission that's set a little too broadly, or a default password that somebody somewhere just never changed. That can be the one tiny crack an attacker needs to pry open the door to your entire system. It's so often simple human error. And another massive one is outdated systems. I mean, just think about it logically. When a company releases a security patch, they're basically putting up a giant neon sign telling the whole world, hey, we found a vulnerability right here. Attackers see that, and they immediately start scanning the internet for any system that hasn't been updated yet. It's a known, reliable way in for them. When you look at all these different vulnerabilities, it can feel, well, pretty overwhelming. It kind of seems like the attackers have all the advantages, doesn't it? So that brings us to the most important question. How do we possibly build a defense against a threat that can come from so many different directions? Well, that leads us right into Section 3, building a digital fortress. A really solid defensive playbook follows these three crucial steps. First things first, if you even suspect a breach, you contain it immediately. Stop the bleeding, right? Then you start analyzing the evidence, digging through the logs like a detective. And finally, you take everything you learned to harden your system so it doesn't happen again. And today, we've got some seriously powerful tools to help with that. Modern security systems can use AI to just watch user behavior. They can spot when an account suddenly starts trying to access weird files it's never touched before, or when its permissions just change out of the blue. These audit trails create a story that AI can read in real time. But all the fancy tech in the world isn't a silver bullet. You have to nail the fundamentals. These are the absolute non-negotiables. First, enforce the principle of least privilege. That just means people only get the absolute minimum access they need to do their jobs, and nothing more. Second, keep your systems patched, all of them. And third, use multi-factor authentication. That extra layer of security can make all the difference. And that idea of layers leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 4, the constant watch. This quote right here, this is the core philosophy of a modern security model called zero trust. The idea is really simple, but it's incredibly powerful. You don't automatically trust anyone or anything, even if they're already inside your network. Every single request to access something has to be verified, every single
time. So, if you're going to take away 3 things from all this, let them be these. First, privilege escalation isn't some magic trick. It's a methodical process, a step-by-step climb. Second, this isn't some rare attack. It is a key ingredient in almost every major data breach you read about. And finally, you can't just buy a solution off the shelf. Defending against this takes a continuous, thoughtful effort.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. The old idea of a secure perimeter, a castle with a moat, is totally gone. Your data, your users, they're everywhere. So the question you really need to ask yourself is this. In your own environment, are you actively verifying every single action? Or are you just trusting that everything's okay?